Remember Robert Durst, I am sure, especially those of you who go into the Law&Crime Network, the avid true crime followers. And he was a part of a show called The Jinx. Now, you see a picture of him up there right now. He was eventually first investigated for the killing of his wife, Kathleen Durst, back in 1992. But there was never enough evidence to move forward with that case. Eventually, there was another person who he was, quote unquote, friends with, Susan Berman, who was just about to go forward to authorities and talk about the Kathleen Durst, his wife's case, her disappearance, when she was shot dead. She was killed. And we, for many, many years, all this time since 2000, no charges were brought against Mr. Durst for that. Now, in between all of this, to make matters even more complex for this eccentric multi-millionaire Robert Durst, who's in the real estate business, is he wound up involved in another case where he was charged with murder, went to trial, and it was found to be self-defense. But listen, I got an awesome guest with me, and it's Ellen Strauss. Now, Ellen, welcome to the Law&Crime Network, and thank you so much for appearing on the show.
I'm very happy to be here, but I did want to tell you, and I hate to correct, the two pictures you put up are not Robert and Kathy.
Okay. Yeah, the pictures are, okay, very good. So let me ask you, Ellen, I understand that you're the college friend and continued friend of Kathleen Durst, and that you know Susan Berman. Is that right?
Yes, I had dinner with Susan Berman. Kathy and I and a bunch of friends all had dinner together at Elaine's back in the 70s.
Okay,
that's Bob.
There you go. There's the defendant, Durst. And there he is now, many years aged. So tell me, what was the nature of the relationship that you had with Kathleen? How did it form? And where did you start to hear the name Robert Durst, and what were your thoughts?
Okay, I met Kathy through a best friend that we shared, Eleanor Schwank, who is since deceased. And we used to have lunch together in the cafeteria at college all the time. Kathy and I continued our friendship when I was in law school and she was in medical school. And she used to call me late at night. My calls were forwarded and complained to me bitterly about Bob's abuse. So I finally said, get the heck out of Dodge.
So tell me, I'm sorry to cut you off. Tell me a little bit about what kind of gravity are we talking about with the abuse? Is it physical abuse, emotional? What kind of abuse?
Both, physical and emotional. He sent her to the hospital, and she was afraid of him, but, you know, there was a dichotomy where she thought she could handle him at the same time that she was afraid of him. She'd get a little courage, and that would be, you know, I'd say leave.
Okay,
so tell me later.
Right, tell me, Kathy, what happened in 1982, and when did you first hear that there was something suspicious that went on with your friend Kathy?
Well, I mean, I was in contact constantly. I talked to Kathy, I think the last time about December 15th, 1981, and I learned that she disappeared at the beginning of 82. We shared the best friend, and the best friend called me up when we started looking for her.
And,
it was,
and when you had heard that she disappeared, did you have an open-minded idea of what may or may not have happened, or did you have a suspicion, I know this has to do with Bob Durst?
I knew immediately because she always said to me, if anything ever happens to me, Bob did it, don't let him get away with it. And I decided to keep my promise. That was pretty much her mantra. That's what she said to all of her friends and her neighbors.
Okay.
Because she knew.
So listen, I understand that after this happened and the authorities are having difficulty settling the case, that you, Ellen, decided to get on the case yourself, fulfill your commitment to her, and you actually started doing some investigative stuff, including going through some garbage. Talk to us about that.
Well, I guess it was in March 7th of 1982, another friend of hers and I went and picked up his garbage can where he lived in South Salem, New York. We went through all the garbage. We took it back. We spread it out. We gave everything to the police. One of the things I found was, I don't know if you can see it, but he had prepared an itinerary of the days right after she disappeared, Monday through Wednesday. And it looked like he was preparing in case, you know, the police he had an alibi.
So give us a little bit, that's an amazing piece of evidence, amazing work you did, but give us an idea of this itinerary. So he's covering his tracks. What's the most compelling thing that's in that itinerary that makes you say, wow, there's no question he did this?
Well, it's the long ride he took. He took a long ride. He put a lot of miles on his car. He put the dog in a kennel. I'm looking here. Let's see. He wrote things down like, this looked like it was in preparation for, because he wrote like 2 o'clock, go to Marshall's, 4 o'clock, go to the apartment and get his hat, 5 o'clock, go to the office. And the next day he writes 7 o'clock, film or whatever. And then 2 a.m., South Salem, 7 a.m., leave home. Then he writes drive, then he writes garage, and then he writes apartment or movie or something. And then the next day he writes boots, let's see, kennel, house. It looked like he was trying to cover his tracks, because basically we knew he lied. He admitted later on that he did. He claimed that he dropped her off at the Katona station. He called her that night at the apartment in New York, which is BS. Right. Susan Berman covered for him, and she's the one who...
So let's, before we get to her, because that's interesting you say covered, because in the end, she probably paid the price for that. We'll get to that in a second. But yes. Ellen, when you brought this to law enforcement's attention, this list and things, did you get the idea kind of like taking it seriously, or were they like, no biggie, thanks so much? What was their temperature?
Well, they seemed to pay attention, but they really believed that Kathy got back to New York, because the elevator man had said he brought her up, but he didn't really see her. It could have been Susan in a wig, in a blonde wig. It just didn't gel. And so we kept after them. And I would visit and go into New York to see the police at the station. And I even invited them to my home. I was trying to make it seem that we were sensible, strong, and not just doing it as buddies. We were all educated women, and not Fairfield County society ladies. Okay,
so we'll talk about Susan Berman. Now, this is going to be an interesting little facet here. Tell me, what is your knowledge of who Susan Berman is? And in fact, you've mentioned her 2 or 3 times as somebody who you believe may have been either knew about it or involved in helping him cover up the actual murder of Kathy Durst, his wife, your friend.
She was his best friend, platonic friend. They met in graduate school, and they had similar backgrounds. Their mothers both died early, either suicide or an accident. Their fathers were important men. Her father was a gangster who owned the Flamingo with Bugsy Siegel. Mm-hmm. She didn't know about that when she was a kid. She found it out when a book was written, and he was mentioned in it, and one of her friends told her. Anyhow, we believe, because it makes the most sense, that Susan called the medical school and said, I won't be in. I'm Kathy Durst. I have a stomach ache or whatever. You don't do that. Believe me, I was in an internship in law school. What you do is you call the place where you're going to be doing the internship. Mm-hmm. If you weren't coming in that day, you certainly didn't call the dean. And obviously Susan and Bob didn't know that.
Now, the Westchester District Attorney, I believe, is handling this case. Did you ever have an opportunity to talk to her? I believe it was Janine Pirro at the time.
I don't have anything nice to say about Janine Pirro. She is a little loose with the truth. And she was more interested in raising money for a campaign. She was running for office than she really was. And then it's been talked about that the Dursts gave money to her campaign. I have no proof of that, but supposedly she met with Doug Durst.
But did you ever have an opportunity to meet with her?
Yes and no. She came to a meeting, she poked her head in, but basically she let it be run by one of the other DAs or state prosecutors. Mm-hmm. And then, of course, I've run into her since at a party. I have refused to be on her show. Okay. There's just no way she tells the truth about anything. Okay, well, in 2000, Susan Berman is dead. Now, when did you find out about that, and what were your immediate reaction knowing all that you've done to try to vindicate the death of Kathy Durst, your friend, his wife? Well, before that happened, 5 weeks before, I gave a map to the door of Susan Berman in California, in Beverly Hills, and I begged the police on the case to talk to the DA and get permission to visit with Susan because, you know, it would be smart. Truthfully, in my heart, I did not believe that Susan would ever give up Bob. She would play her cards close to her chest. But Bob didn't believe it, and that's why he killed her.
So do I understand you to say that it was based upon you pressuring the police or trying to get the police to speak to Susan, which is what ultimately led to the authorities saying, Susan, we want to speak to you?
You know, how do I know, really? I mean, I know that I bugged them and asked them to go out there, and by the time they did, she'd already been shot in the back of the head by Bob. She knew too much, and Bob... It's really cold what he did. It was his best friend, like a sister.
Okay. Hey, Ellen, let me go to the Jinx, right? Now, you appeared on that show, and this is the fascinating part. We discussed this as legal analysts all over the place. He's mic'd up. First of all, as a defense lawyer, we would never, ever, ever allow our clients to do that unless they absolutely insisted. But while mic'd up, he leaves on a break, or after they're done with the show, he's still got the mic. It's live. It's hot. He goes into the bathroom, and he's caught making this statement. What the hell did I do? Killed them all, of course.
Well, Kathy told me that Bob made a habit of talking to himself and making all kinds of growling noises. So it's not surprising. He forgot the mic was hot, and he went into the bathroom. The cameras were shut off. He had no idea that he was being heard, and he spilled the beans. Now, the other thing is, I think even more than that was the fact that in the week before in the Jinx, they showed an envelope that Bob had written, 2 envelopes to Susan.
Right.
One contained money, and one was warning the police that there was a dead body, a cadaver, at her house. And he wrote in green ink, which he always liked to do, and he spelled the name Beverly Hills incorrectly, Beverly, twice exactly the same, years apart. And the envelopes weren't discovered right away because Susan's stepson, or Zat's stepson, had all her papers in a file, and nobody had gone through it. The police never even looked. And then, little by little, I think even with the Jinx, they didn't know about it right away. They had put all the stuff away, and a couple of years later, they were going through a box, one of the assistants, and he said, hey, guys, you got to hear this. Mm-hmm. And then they had to hire their own attorney because they are not an arm of the law. They did not force this. This is Bob on his own.
Ellen, there's a lot of moving pieces to this case. I mean, we've got 2 murders. He was involved in a third thing where he went to third trial where he was acquitted of the murder. But nevertheless, do you agree with me that sometimes you got to take a step back, go into the file, re-look at it all over again with a new set of eyes and this new information? And is that what was done here, and why Durst is now on trial for killing his friend, who you believed was actually trying to help him cover up the murder of your friend Kathy?
Exactly, a new set of eyes. I mean, I was a new set of eyes for the people in New York when I didn't think they were doing enough. And that's why I started investigating on my own. Don't forget, in those days, you could get people's social security numbers and all. I was good at research. And I found that Bob was using a bunch of people's social security numbers, including Kathy's, and he would have all these fake identities.
Right, and it's interesting, too, when they eventually arrested him in New Orleans in 2015, there's not the first time he was in disguise. He had a weapon with him. He's got charges pending there. Let me ask you, has the prosecution reached out for you in this trial and asked whether or not you'd be willing to assist with regard to the allegation against him for killing Susan Berman, who had the goods on him with respect to killing your friend?
They have been to my home. Jonathan, the prosecutor and the cold case detective, the major case people, they sat here in my living room. I gave them all of my documents that were handwritten from years ago because I am a little OCD and I kept everything written down. I have a lot of Redwell files. They have everything that matters. And
Well,
you know.
Ellen, listen, I wish I could be talking to you because I've covered this case before in other venues. To have somebody like you come on a great show like Law and Crime, where we cover things gavel to gavel, we got some great legal analysts. You were an unbelievable person to interview. I wish I had more time, but I got to run. Maybe you'll come back again as this trial. Yes, this trial unfolds, and either with me on my show or any of the other hosts, we would love to hear from you. And you know what? I want to congratulate you and thank you as a citizen investigator for all the work you did to honor that commitment to your friend Kathy Durst all those years ago, that you had her back. And obviously, you're a woman of your word. Thank you.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Okay, bye now. Listen, we're going to take a quick break, and we're going to come back on the other end with more Law and Crime. What a fascinating interview.